Hey everyone, welcome to our deep dive, into how to win friends and influence people.
By Dale Carnegie.
Yeah, by Dale Carnegie,
Wow.
exactly. This book, it's wild how it's been a bestseller for almost a century now. Like, talk about standing the test of time. Why do you think it's resonated with so many people for so long?
It's interesting, especially if you think about the context.
Yeah,
Carnegie wrote this during the Great Depression.
right.
You'd think people would be more worried about, like, I don't know, putting food on the table than, like, making friends.
Right, totally.
But his message about genuine connection, it really resonated back then, and honestly, it's still so relevant today.
Yeah. It's like deep down, I feel like we all just crave that feeling of belonging, and being understood. But I do wonder, some people might hear that title, How to Win Friends and Influence People, and be like, is this book about, like, manipulating people?
Right.
And honestly, I kind of get it.
Yeah.
But, as I was going through it, I realized that Carnegie's not about tricks or, like, short putts.
Mm-hmm.
It's about something, I think, much deeper and more genuine.
Exactly. Sincerity. That's a big one for him. It's throughout the book.
Right.
He emphasizes that it's not about manipulation. It's about unlocking your own potential for building real, lasting relationships.
Yeah.
And he uses all these stories.
Right, and they're good stories.
They're such good stories.
They're really good.
Like Abraham Lincoln, John D. Rockefeller.
Yeah, it's wild. Franklin D. Roosevelt.
It's amazing.
Like, big name. Okay, so let's unpack it a little bit. The book's broken down into 4 parts.
Okay.
We're going to kick things off with part 1, fundamental techniques in handling people.
Okay.
And the first principle is, honestly, kind of a tough pill to swallow.
Cool.
Don't criticize, condemn, or complain.
It's so true, though. It's so true. And that's where I think you see his really deep understanding of human nature.
Yeah.
Because he's arguing that negativity, it's almost always counterproductive.
Mm-hmm.
We all have this like deep ingrained instinct to justify our actions.
Yeah.
Even when we're in the wrong.
Yeah.
And he uses this crazy story about this gangster two-gun Crowley
Oh, yeah.
to drive this point home.
This is the guy who, like, even while he's holed up in this apartment, surrounded by police, right? He writes this letter, and he's like, under my coat is a weary heart, but a kind one that would do nobody any harm. Like, are you kidding me? Talk about being detached from reality.
Talk about justification.
Right.
But it's a perfect example, because we all have that internal narrative.
Yeah.
But then he contrasts that with Lincoln's response to General Meade after Gettysburg.
Oh, yeah.
Which is just brilliant.
Oh, that's good.
So Lincoln was furious after Gettysburg.
Yeah.
Meade let Lee's army escape, which prolonged the war.
Right. Right.
And you'd expect like a scathing rebuke.
Totally. I mean, the stakes are so high.
Totally.
Yeah.
But instead, he writes this really measured letter acknowledging the complexities of the battle.
Wow.
And I think he recognized that tearing Meade down wouldn't have achieved anything. And it's such a powerful example of, like, leadership through understanding, not blame.
It makes you think, are we so quick to judge in our own lives,
Right.
Could we be more like Lincoln, like choosing empathy over criticism?
It's a good question. It's a powerful question. Absolutely. And it's a question I think, we should all be asking ourselves.
Totally, yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Okay, what's next? So we've got give honest and sincere appreciation.
Yeah.
And, this one really, I don't know, it resonated with me because it speaks to this basic human need, right?
Totally.
To feel important, to feel valued.
Yeah. And it's so interesting, right? Like even the greats like, Freud and Dewey, they recognize this longing for importance as like this fundamental driving force in human behavior.
Right.
And Carnegie really understood that.
Yeah.
It's not flattery, it's genuine appreciation. That's the key to unlocking that potential in others.
And this is where I think that story about Charles Schwab comes in, right?
Yeah.
The guy who built Bethlehem Steel.
Yeah.
Like this massive, he was one of the richest men alive.
I know.
And he attributed his success to, not to his technical skills,
Right.
but to his ability to handle people well.
It's amazing. And his secret weapon was sincere appreciation.
It's wild.
He made it a point to make people feel valued and, to recognize them for their contributions.
And it's like, if he has time for that, then,
I know.
the rest of us should too.
Exactly.
Okay, so that's all well and good, but like, how do we actually influence people? And that leads us to principle number 3 in this section. Arouse in the other person an eager want.
Ooh, I like this one a lot.
Yeah.
It's so interesting because Carnegie argues that, to truly influence someone, we need to understand their perspective. You know what I mean?
Totally.
Their desires, their motivations. And to illustrate this, he tells this very charming story, I think, about Ralph Waldo Emerson, the philosopher.
Okay.
Trying to get a calf into the barn.
Okay, I have to hear this one. What does a philosopher and a stubborn calf have to do with,
I know,
How
right?
great is this?
So Emerson and his son, they're pushing and pulling this calf.
Okay.
But it's just, refusing to budge.
Yeah.
And it's not until the irate housemaid comes along, puts her finger in the calf's mouth, appealing to its desire to suckle.
Oh, smart, yeah.
That it willingly follows her into the barn.
I love that. It's so simple, but it's, such a good analogy, right?
Yes.
Because it's we try to, force our will on others,
Totally.
instead of actually being what is it that's going to make them want to do this thing?
Yes, exactly. And then he takes it a step further, and he gives this really practical example of how this plays out, in business communication.
Okay.
And he compares 2 letters written by this radio department manager.
Okay.
Who's trying to get a local station to broadcast their program.
Got it.
So the first letter is basically just this laundry list of the company's needs,
Yeah.
we need more publicity, we need more sales, and you can practically hear the station manager yawning as he's reading it.
Right.
But the second letter, that's where the magic happens. It's all about the station's needs.
Okay.
This program can bring you a larger audience. You can boost your reputation.
Right.
We even have some content that's ready-made that you guys can use.
Oh. So it's instead of just demanding things, it's hey, we're actually going to give you something too.
Exactly. And it's just this complete shift in perspective.
Right.
And I think this principle, appealing to the other person's wants, is it's gold.
Totally.
And it could be applied to so many areas of life, whether you're negotiating a raise or you're trying to get your team on board with a new project.
Right.
Or even, just trying to get your kids to do their chores. Right?
Totally. It's understanding what makes people tick. Right. Which actually, you know what? This is perfect. It leads us right into part 2. 6 ways to make people like you. And these principles are all about building rapport.
Yeah.
And making those initial connections that lay the foundation for stronger relationships.
I love that.
And the first one is, it's so simple.
Okay.
But I think so often overlooked, become genuinely interested in others.
Yes. And this is where I think, Carnegie's genius really comes through. Because he understood that, being a good conversationalist isn't about being the wittiest person in the room or being the most, I don't know.
Right, yeah.
It's about being a good listener.
Totally.
And showing genuine interest in the people that you're with.
Yeah.
And he illustrates this with a story about spending an evening with Howard Thurston, the magician.
Oh, wow. Okay. Yeah, the famous magician.
The famous magician.
Okay, I'm intrigued.
And Thurston was at the top of his game, but he admitted that even after decades of performing for these adoring crowds, he wasn't that interested in magic itself.
Really?
It was the stories that people shared.
Interesting.
Is the connections that he made that he was truly captivated by.
That's so interesting.
And he was just genuinely curious about others, and I think that's what made him such a master of connection.
It's so funny you say that because it reminds me of this this journalist who I really admire, and he said the secret to being a good storyteller, he's it's not about you being a good writer. It's about you being fascinated by people.
Yeah.
Because everyone has a story.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And it's just uncovering those stories.
Totally. And that's that genuine interest, Yeah. It opens doors and it makes people feel seen. And I think that's such a powerful thing.
100%. Okay, so what's next in Carnegie's bag of tricks?
All right. So this one, get ready for it. It's a classic. Smile. Okay, I mean,
I know.
It's okay, that seems almost too simple.
I know.
But how can something so small make such a big difference,
You'd be surprised.
Okay.
Carnegie reminds us that, a smile is this universal language of warmth.
Right.
And approachability. And he tells this great anecdote about Franklin Bettger, who was a former baseball player turned wildly successful insurance salesman.
Oh, wow. Okay. All right. I'm here for it. What was his secret? Okay, so Bettger had this really simple but powerful technique that he did before he walked into a client's office.
Okay.
He would just pause.
Okay.
He would think of things he was grateful for, and then he would put on or I shouldn't even say put on, he would cultivate a genuine smile.
Okay.
It wasn't about, like, faking it.
Yeah, yeah.
It was about, like, shifting his internal state.
Totally.
To one of warmth and positivity.
It's so funny how I think we underestimate the power of a smile.
I know.
But you're right, because it is disarming.
Yes.
It makes people feel at ease. Even I'm trying to think of, like, people that I, like, naturally gravitate towards. And it's like, you're right. It's the ones who, like, are quick to smile.
Exactly. It's true. And it's contagious.
It's true.
Yeah. It just changes the whole dynamic of the interaction.
Totally. Okay, what's next?
Okay, so this one can be a game changer if you can master it. Remember names.
Ooh, yeah, that's a good one.
I'm big on this one.
I can see that.
Carnegie believed that remembering someone's name is the simplest yet most powerful compliment you can give.
Yes.
Because it shows you value that person as an individual.
Oh, it's so true. And I have to say, I'm so bad with names.
I think we all are.
Yeah,
I think
effort.
It does take effort, especially, you're someone who meets a lot of people. But I will say, when someone remembers my name, I'm like, gasps.
Yes.
They listen to me.
Especially, like weeks, months later.
Yes, exactly.
They care.
Exactly. And to illustrate this, Carnegie talks about Jim Farley.
Yeah.
And this guy was legendary for his ability to remember names. He was Roosevelt's campaign manager.
Oh, wow. So that's a lot of names.
Thousands of people.
Yeah.
He made it a point to really connect with people on a personal level. Like he'd write down these little notes about them, their families, their interests.
Ooh.
So it wasn't just about like memorizing names.
Yeah.
It was about remembering the people attached to those names.
Did Carnegie have any I don't know, techniques or anything for remembering names?
He does. He shares this kind of funny story from his own childhood.
Okay.
So he had all these rabbits,
Yeah.
But he had no food for these rabbits.
Okay.
And so he promised all of his friends that if they helped him gather clover and dandelions, he would name a rabbit after them.
Oh, that's brilliant.
So even as a kid.
He's
like tapping into that.
That's amazing. Okay, what's next?
Okay, this one builds on that idea of making people feel heard. Be a good listener. Encourage others to talk about themselves.
Yeah.
And he said that most people, they love to talk about themselves,
Yeah.
Their experiences, their passion.
That's true.
And oftentimes, the best thing we can do is just listen.
Yes.
Without interrupting or trying to steer the conversation in a different direction.
I will say this is one I struggle with.
Yeah, me too.
Because it's so easy to get caught up in wanting to share your own thing,
Totally. No, I think we've all been there.
Yeah.
But it's a skill, right? It takes practice.
Yeah.
He tells this story about Maurice Chevalier.
Okay.
Do you know him? The entertainer, the French entertainer.
Oh, yeah. With the smile and the straw hat.
Yes, exactly.
Okay.
Thank heaven for little girls.
Yeah, exactly.
So he was the master of charm and connection.
Right.
And he attributed his success to, you guessed it, being a good listener.
It makes sense.
And he said, and I love this quote, he said, "Many a man would rather you heard his story than granted his request."
That is so true, though.
That's so true.
Because it's we're so focused on getting our point across and what we need that we forget that sometimes it's just about hearing the other person.
And it's so much more pleasant, I think.
Totally, yeah.
For everyone involved.
For sure. Okay, what else? What else you got?
Okay, so Carnegie, he tells this other story that I think illustrates this beautifully.
Okay.
It's about this businessman who goes to Chicago to confront a supplier.
Okay.
This company called Detmer Woolen about a bill that he felt was unfair.
Okay.
And he goes in there ready for a fight. Right.
Literally, yeah.
But when he meets with a company rep, instead of arguing back, the guy actually thanks him.
Really?
For coming all the way to Chicago to voice his concerns.
Wow. Okay, what a plot twist.
I know.
What did he do?
And he was totally disarmed by that.
Yeah.
And because he felt heard and respected, he was actually willing to work towards a compromise.
Totally. It reminds me of that, how people are never go grocery shopping on an empty stomach.
Yes.
This is don't start a business negotiation or any negotiation, really, without acknowledging the other person.
Exactly. And it's amazing how that shift in approach, it completely changes the tone.
Totally. Okay, so speaking of really connecting with people, though, the next principle is talk in terms of the other person's interests. So it's not just about listening, it's about actually engaging with them on what lights them up, right?
And it makes sense when you think about it, because we all gravitate towards people who share our interests, right?
Totally.
And Carnegie, he uses the story of Isaac F. Marcusson to really illustrate this. This guy went from being this shy kid to, like, interviewing some of the most prominent figures of his time.
Wow, okay.
Like Emerson, General Grant, even President Garfield.
Okay, so he must have had some serious people skills.
I know.
How did he do it?
So it all started because he was just genuinely curious about others.
Okay.
And so he would, like, write these letters to these famous people and ask them about, like, their childhoods and their experiences.
Okay.
And because he was so engaged with them, they would actually respond.
Wow. That's amazing. Yeah.
Isn't that amazing? It's like this great reminder that genuine curiosity, it can open these doors.
It makes sense. It's like when someone's really listening to you, you're more likely to want to talk to them.
Exactly. And Carnegie points out that even Theodore Roosevelt, who is known for connecting with people from all walks of life, he used this technique too. Like, before meeting someone new, he would make it a point to learn about their hobbies, their passions, their work,
Okay.
And then he would steer the conversation toward those topics.
So it's like doing your homework before a presentation, but the presentation is just being a good conversationalist.
Exactly.
I love that.
And it just shows that, even the most powerful figures, they understood the importance of meeting people where they are.
That's a good point. Totally, totally. Okay, so what's like the last word on making people like you?
Okay, so this one I think ties everything together beautifully. Make the other person feel important and do it sincerely.
Yes.
Carnegie believed that everyone, no matter how successful or how self-assured they may seem, they crave that recognition and appreciation.
Oh, 100%. It's like, you know how everyone says, like, everyone just wants to feel seen?
Yes.
It's so true.
Yet he tells this great story about George Eastman, founder of Kodak.
Oh, yeah.
Huge
household name.
Right. So Eastman, this is a titan of industry, right?
Yeah.
But even he craved appreciation.
Yeah.
And so there's this story about this architect who's designing a building for him.
Okay.
And the architect compliments Eastman on his office.
Okay. Okay.
And Eastman was so touched by this that he spends the next hour showing him around, beaming with pride.
It's such a good feeling when, like, someone notices something that, you put your heart into or whatever. You feel seen.
It means the world. And you know what? That architect, he ended up getting a huge contract from Eastman. And it's not necessarily because he was the most talented architect, but because he made Eastman feel valued.
It's amazing how much, like, a small gesture can go such a long way.
Isn't it amazing?
Really?
It just shows that everyone, regardless of their status or their accomplishments, they want to feel seen,
For sure. For sure. Okay, so we've got these 6 principles. They all seem to be about, like, shifting your focus from yourself to the person that you're with,
Yes.
Be interested, smile, remember their name.
Yes.
Listen, engage with their passions, make them feel valued.
Beautifully put. And I think it's about recognizing, like, the inherent worth in each person that you encounter,
100%. 100%. Okay, I'm ready for part 3.
Okay.
This one sounds a little intimidating. 12 ways to win people to your way of thinking.
Yeah.
And I have to be honest, the phrase win people to your way of thinking
I know, right?
makes me think of, like those old school, like, sales tactics that feel kind of, like, icky a little bit.
No, it sounds very Machiavellian, right?
Totally.
But remember, Carnegie, he emphasizes sincerity throughout,
Yeah.
And this section, it's not about manipulating people.
Okay.
It's about, how do you communicate your ideas effectively, respectfully, so that others are more receptive to them.
Right. Okay, that makes a lot more sense.
Right.
Okay, hit me with principle number 1.
Okay, it's a game changer, but it's definitely easier said than done.
Okay.
Show respect for the other person's opinions. Never say you're wrong.
Whoa, okay, that's tough.
It is tough.
Especially when you're, like, in it, you know what I mean? And you're like, I'm right.
Yes.
Yeah.
But Carnegie, he argues that when we tell someone they're wrong, it immediately puts them on the defensive.
Right.
And it shuts down the conversation.
Totally.
And to illustrate this, he uses this great story about this tax inspector.
Okay.
And so this businessman is trying to appeal a tax assessment.
Okay.
But the inspector, he's being really stubborn.
Okay.
Like, really unreasonable.
Yeah.
And so instead of, like, arguing back, the businessman decides to acknowledge the inspector's expertise. He starts asking him all these questions about his work.
Oh, interesting.
Expressing genuine admiration.
Smart. Okay.
And you know what? The inspector, he just softens immediately. He felt respected. And ultimately, you know what? He was much more willing to listen to the businessman's appeal.
So it's like even in a disagreement, it's like find the common ground first.
Exactly. And it's about recognizing that everyone has a right to their own perspective.
Totally.
Even if you don't agree with it.
100%.
Okay.
Okay, this next one, it's probably going to sting a little bit.
Okay.
Carnegie says, if you are wrong, admit it quickly and emphatically.
Oof. Ouch. I don't know, man.
No, it's so counterintuitive.
Yeah.
Right? Like, our natural instinct is to, like, defend ourselves.
Totally.
Even if we think we might be wrong.
Yes.
But Carnegie, he argues that admitting fault, it actually disarms the other person.
Right.
It creates this environment of trust.
So it's about being vulnerable and, like, owning your mistakes. Exactly. And he tells this great story about this young lawyer who's arguing a case before the Supreme Court.
Okay.
Okay, so this lawyer, he was actually correct about a point of law.
Oh.
But he made the mistake of correcting a Supreme Court justice.
Ooh.
And not very gracefully, I might add.
Yeah, I can imagine that didn't go over so well.
Not well. They were offended.
Yeah.
And so even though he was right, he ended up losing his argument.
It's like they say, he won the battle but lost the war.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it's such a good reminder that sometimes it's better to, swallow your pride and admit you were wrong.
Totally. Totally. Even though it's hard?
Even though it's so hard.
Oh, my gosh. Yes. Okay, what's next?
Okay, this one is a little more straightforward, I think, but it's so important. Begin in a friendly way.
It's like my mom always says, you catch more flies with honey than vinegar.
Yes. Your mom is a wise woman.
She is.
Carnegie believed that, that starting any conversation, but especially like difficult conversations with warmth and goodwill, it sets a much more positive tone.
Totally.
And he uses the example of John D. Rockefeller, the oil tycoon.
Ooh, okay, yeah, now we're talking. That's a name that, kind of like, he's going to be a tough negotiator.
I know, right? So Rockefeller was dealing with this group of miners who were ready to strike.
Okay.
Like they were angry, they were frustrated.
Yeah.
And instead of coming in with threats and ultimatums, he does the opposite. He sits down with them, he listens to their grievances, he acknowledges their frustrations.
Wow, so he's like leading with empathy.
Exactly.
Right.
And most importantly, he treated them with respect.
Right.
Like as equals.
Yeah, I love that.
And you know what? It worked. His willingness to approach the situation with that friendly, understanding attitude, it diffused the tension.
Wow, that's amazing.
The miners, they felt heard, and ultimately, they agreed to go back to work.
That's incredible. And it makes me realize, like, how often do I approach conversations or, like, disagreements as if I'm, like, going into battle?
Totally.
We
all do it. It's human nature. But Carnegie's just reminding us that, like, a little bit of warmth and kindness can go a long way.
For sure. Okay, what else we got?
Okay, so this next one, this is a great technique for, like, I think shifting the dynamic of a conversation.
Okay.
Get the other person saying yes, yes immediately.
Ooh, I like this.
I know, right?
Okay, tell me more.
Okay, so it's all about starting with points of agreement, even if they're small.
Okay.
Just to build that momentum, create a more collaborative atmosphere.
So it's like, instead of leading with the disagreements, it's like, find something you can both agree on first.
Yes, exactly. And he uses this example of this bank employee who's trying to open a new account for this customer.
Okay.
And the customer is being kind of resistant.
Yeah.
And so instead of starting with, like all the bank's requirements, he says this. He's like, wouldn't you like to have the bank transfer your money to your next of kin if you were to pass away?
Well, yeah.
Right.
Of course you want that.
It was something they could both easily agree on.
Right, yeah.
And then it opens the door for this more productive conversation.
It's such a good strategy.
It's about finding that alignment.
Yeah.
That like creates that collaborative energy.
I love that. What's next?
Okay, this one's a classic for a reason.
Okay.
And it's music to a lot of people's ears. Let the other person do a great deal of the talking.
I know so many people who would be happy about that. But really, why is this so effective?
Because Carnegie understood that people, they just love to talk about themselves.
Yeah.
Their experiences, their ideas.
Yeah, for sure.
And when we encourage others to talk, it makes them feel heard, it makes them feel valued, it makes them feel respected.
Right. So it's about giving them the space and not feeling like you need to dominate the conversation.
Exactly. And he tells this great story about this salesman.
Okay.
Who's trying to close this massive deal.
Okay.
And he goes to the meeting, and he's got this whole elaborate presentation.
Yeah.
But then he realizes, you know what? These clients, they're much more interested in talking about their own ideas.
Oh, no. That's like every salesperson's worst nightmare.
I know.
Okay. So what did he do?
He does something brilliant. He puts aside his presentation.
Wow. Okay.
And he just listens.
Wow. Okay.
And he asks these clarifying questions. He lets them brainstorm. He makes them feel like they're in the driver's seat,
Yeah.
And you know what? He ends up closing the deal.
Wow.
Without even having to go through his presentation.
It's like they say sometimes the best sales pitch is no sales pitch at all.
Exactly. And I think it's because he created that environment where they felt heard.
Oh, totally.
They felt understood.
Yeah,
they felt like they were part of that process.
Totally, yeah. Okay, what's next?
Okay, this one is subtle but powerful. Let the other person feel that the idea is his or hers.
I like that.
Right.
So it's not about taking credit for the idea. It's about making them feel like they own it.
Yes. And Carnegie understood that people are much more likely to support ideas that they feel like they came up with.
Totally.
He uses the example of Woodrow Wilson and his advisor, Colonel House.
Okay.
Now, House was often the one coming up with these brilliant strategies.
Okay.
But he was a master at presenting those ideas to Wilson in a way that made Wilson think that they were his own.
That's brilliant. So it's like, instead of it's giving credit where credit's due, or even better, making them feel like, hey, you came up with this.
Exactly. And it's about shifting that focus from me to we.
I love that. Okay.
It's about collaboration, not competition.
That's a good one. That's a subtle art, but I can see how that would be so effective.
It is. And it's really about being a leader who empowers others.
Totally.
Not a boss who dictates.
I love that. Okay, ready for the final part of the book? This is, it's called Be a Leader, How to Change People Without Giving Offense or Arousing Resentment. And I feel like this is something we all need a little help with.
Oh, 100%.
Yeah.
Yes. And it's interesting how this section ties back to that first principle we discussed.
Right.
Don't criticize, condemn, or complain.
Right.
He understood that leading with negativity, with judgment, it almost always backfires.
Totally. Yeah.
It creates resentment.
Yeah.
It creates resistance.
Yes.
And so the question becomes, well, how do we lead effectively?
Right.
Without putting people on the defensive?
Right.
And he starts with this, again, familiar theme. Begin with praise and honest appreciation.
So even when we need to, correct behavior, it's start with a positive first.
Exactly. And he tells this great story about Charles Schwab.
Okay.
So apparently Schwab sees some of his employees smoking near a no-smoking sign.
Okay.
Now, most bosses, they come down hard, right?
Oh, 100%. Rules are rules.
Exactly. But Schwab, he does something completely unexpected. He walks over to these employees, he hands each of them a cigar, and he says something like, I'd appreciate it if you smoked these outside.
I love that. He could have gotten angry.
Right.
But instead he's choosing kindness and humor.
Yes.
I bet you those employees were like, oh, shoot. You got me.
I know.
No.
And they felt respected, even though they knew they were in the wrong.
Exactly. Okay, I love that. What else? What else we got?
Okay, this one is all about how we frame feedback,
Okay.
in a way that's less likely to trigger those defenses.
Yeah.
Call attention to people's mistakes indirectly.
Ooh, okay. So, be a little tactful.
A little tactful, a little less direct.
I could use some help with that.
We all could. And so he tells this great story about this preacher, Lyman Abbott, who was asked to give a sermon after the death of this really famous preacher, Henry Ward Beecher.
Okay.
So Abbott, he's feeling the pressure.
Right. Big shoes to fill.
Huge shoes to fill, right?
Yeah.
And so he shows the sermon to his wife, and he's hoping for some feedback. And, instead of criticizing it directly, she just asked this really simple question. She goes, Lyman, are you preaching to 2,000 people or to Henry Ward Beecher?
Oh, that's such a good question. Because it's making him think about it, but it's not.
It's not an attack.
Yes, exactly.
And it made Abbott realize that he was trying too hard to emulate Beecher.
Right.
Instead of just being authentic to his own style.
Totally. And it's like that question just kind of makes him come to that realization on his own.
Exactly. And it's a great example of how a subtle question can be much more effective than, like, blunt criticism.
For sure.
Okay, what's next?
Okay, so this one is about creating that culture of, like, openness and accountability.
Okay.
Talk about your own mistakes before criticizing the other person.
Ooh, okay. So lead by example.
Lead by example and showing them, hey, I'm not perfect.
Right.
I make mistakes too.
And it makes you more relatable.
Totally. It makes you so much more relatable. And then it creates a space where they feel safe to maybe acknowledge their own.
For sure. I love that. What else we got?
Okay, so this principle is all about autonomy and empowerment.
Okay.
No one likes to take orders. Truer words have never been spoken.
Right. I know. And Carnegie, he believed that people are just far more motivated and engaged when they feel like they have a choice.
Totally.
When they feel empowered to make their own decisions.
Totally. So it's about, like, offering guidance, not giving, like, commands.
Exactly. And he gives this great example of Owen D. Young, who is this, like, really successful businessman.
Okay.
And Young, he never gave direct orders.
Wow. Okay.
Instead, he would offer suggestions.
Yeah.
He would ask questions.
Okay.
And then he would step back.
Right.
And he would let his team figure out the best way forward.
I love that.
Yeah.
I mean, it takes a lot of trust, but I bet it, like, allows for so much more creativity and, like, thinking outside the box.
Totally. And it's about empowering people to be their best selves, not controlling them.
I love that. Okay, next leadership lesson, please.
Okay, this is a powerful one. Let the other person save face.
Ooh, that's a good one.
Right.
Yeah.
So Carnegie said, even when someone is clearly in the wrong, we should always strive to preserve their dignity.
Yeah, I've heard that. Like, you should always leave a bridge standing.
Exactly. Exactly. It's about understanding that everyone makes mistakes.
Right.
And sometimes the kindest thing we can do is allow them to, like, gracefully back down,
Totally.
without humiliation.
Yeah.
And to illustrate this, he uses this amazing historical example of Mustafa Kemal.
Okay.
Who was this Turkish leader who defeated the Greeks in a war.
Okay.
And when the Greek generals came to surrender, Kemal, he could have, like, humiliated them.
Right.
Rubbed it in their faces.
Yeah, like, I told you so.
Exactly. It's so tempting to do that, right?
Literally.
But he did something remarkable. He treated them with respect and dignity, even though they were his enemies.
Wow. Talk about taking the high road.
I know.
Yeah.
And this act of grace, it had this really profound impact, I think, on the Greeks. And it helped to pave the way for this more peaceful future because it didn't breed that resentment.
That's amazing. Wow. Okay. What else does Carnegie say about leading with grace?
Okay, so this one is all about the power of encouragement. Praise the slightest improvement and praise every improvement. Be hearty in your approbation and lavish in your praise.
Yes.
Carnegie believed that most of us, we don't hear enough praise in our lives.
No, I agree.
And it could make all the difference.
And you know what? It's so true because I find that when I feel genuinely appreciated and encouraged, I'm like, all right, let's go. Let's do this.
Totally. And he shares this really heartwarming story about Charles Dickens.
Okay.
Oh,
yeah.
The author.
Yeah, of course. Everyone loves Dickens.
So even Dickens, he struggled for years to get his work published.
Right.
He faced, like, rejection after rejection.
Wow.
And then finally, one editor saw something in his writing and offered him some encouragement.
Wow.
And that was it.
Wow.
That little bit of praise gave Dickens the confidence to keep going, and the rest is history.
Wow. What a powerful story and what a legacy for that editor to be like, I saw something in you, and then look what happened. It's amazing.
Right.
Okay, what's next?
Okay, so this principle is all about the power of expectation.
Okay.
Give the other person a fine reputation to live up to.
Yes.
Carnegie believed that people, they often rise to the level of expectation that we set for them.
It's so true. It's like when a teacher believes in a student, and then the student's like, well, they believe in me, so maybe I can do it.
Yes, exactly. And to illustrate this, he tells this really moving story about this young boy who dreamed of being a writer.
Okay.
But, he faced all this hardship, like his dad was in jail. He had to work these long hours in a factory.
Wow.
He had very little formal education.
Right.
But someone saw his potential. Someone gave him that fine reputation to live up to.
Wow.
And he went on to become, one of the greatest writers of all time.
Wait, is this Charles Dickens again?
It is Charles Dickens again.
Oh, my God.
It's the same guy.
Stop it. That's amazing.
And that belief, that encouragement, it made all the difference.
That is wild. Okay, what's next?
Okay, this one is a bit more nuanced, but I think it speaks to the importance of making it easy for people to change.
Okay.
Use encouragement. Make the fault you want to correct seem easy to correct. Make the thing you want the other person to do seem easy to do.
Right. So it's like you're removing the obstacles, Yeah. And you're setting them up for success.
Exactly. And it's about understanding that, change is hard,
Yeah, totally.
And a little bit of encouragement goes a long way.
100%.
And Carnegie uses the example of this dance teacher.
Okay.
Who tells a student that he has this, natural sense of rhythm.
I don't think any of my dance teachers ever said that to me.
But even if the student wasn't Fred Astaire.
Right.
That little bit of encouragement probably made them feel more confident.
Right.
Which then made them more willing to practice.
Totally, totally. So it's about focusing on the strengths, even when you're trying to address a weakness, maybe.
Exactly.
Okay, I like it. Okay, this has been amazing. What's a